So much for being here. So we've had some work and discussion this morning, and we've been talking about sexual mindfulness. We've been talking about shame and stigma. And so I am so thrilled the two of you are here. I'm total fanboy of both of you. So I'm really, truly just ecstatic. I was wondering, could we start off maybe with you introducing yourself, and specifically if in your introduction, if you feel comfortable relating how sexuality and sensuality is meaningful to you in your own self-definition? If either of you wants to go first, or I can call on one.
I would default to Caffyn.
Caffyn, go for it.
Okay, I will introduce myself. So my name is Caffyn, and I am speaking to you from the lands, the unceded territories of the Hokominum and Tsimshian speaking people, which is colonially known as Salt Spring Island in near Vancouver, Canada. And yes, sexuality is kind of been my life, my work. It's been a real focus for me. I'm now retired, but I've spent the last decade or so as working as a teacher of somatic sex education, which is a body-based modality that supports people in healing trauma and finding more pleasure in their sexuality. And I worked in the field for many years as what I called a sacred intimate, so offering touch-based experiences to people. It could have been within a therapeutic framework or an idea of having an island of pleasure kind of framework. So basically doing sex work, but having this kind of frame around it of being trauma informed, understanding how the body holds trauma, and how trauma can only be healed by through the body, in the body, and also in a relational environment that is radically kind and loving, and that goes some way to repair the damages of normative culture. So I'm a queer and gender queer person, and I am myself a survivor of sexual trauma. And I've also had times in my life, and even now, all these complexities weave together in our sexuality so inconveniently and so beautifully and mysteriously, but times when my sexuality seemed like a troublesome inconvenience, and times when it's felt like a place of massive empowerment and collective joy, celebration. So all these things can be true at once. That's me today. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for acknowledging where you are on this planet and the life that you've experienced, the trauma that you've gone through, and how you've brought that forward as ways to learn and heal others. Thank you so much. And being vulnerable. Thank you. Roger?
Well, Stonko Hesje, greetings. Welcome. Hi, everyone. My name is Roger Kuhn. I am right now in Ohlone territory in the village of Yelamu, which is now known as San Francisco in the state of California. I myself am Porch Creek, so you may even see in my name there it says Porch Creek in Ohlone territory. So I'm referencing my own tribal nation, and then as well as the territory that I'm in today. Nice to be with you all. I'm so curious about, I was reading the description for the SAR, and I'm just really curious about the conversations you've had prior to us getting here today. So that's somewhat on my mind. I guess a little bit about me. I'm an ASEX certified sex therapist. I also work as a faculty lecturer at San Francisco State University here in the city. I teach in their American Indian Studies program, and specifically I focus on courses around Indigenous sexuality, including Indigenous feminism, and a course called Native Sexuality and Queer Discourse, which focuses primarily on Two-Spirit, Indigiqueer, and early LGBTQ plus identified Native peoples, such as gay American Indians, which was formed here in San Francisco in around 1975. So I'm working toward my ASEC sex educator certification. I just have the supervision hours to do, and it's a little bit more about me. You can always find out more about me by visiting my website, etc. But how is sexuality meaningful is the question. I mean, I think that, well, that's why I'm here, right? I mean, sexuality for me is something that, I mean, as a sexuality professional, I think is the reason why I'm here. And it's meaningful for me in that way of, like, well, in some regard, sexuality has been healing for me on a personal level. And then from an academic perspective, to be able to study folks that are like me, that identify as Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer, it's like, oh, okay, there's actually space for the discourse that I bring in, the discussion that I bring in, which predominantly situates around decolonizing and unsettling sexuality. And I think it's meaningful just because it's, the more that I've explored that personally and professionally, the more opportunities I've gotten. And this has been one interesting past couple of months that, you know, just because of sexuality, you know, I usually tell a little story when I give presentations about, you know, just carrying a sign above my head, walking down Market Street in San Francisco several years ago that said decolonize sexuality, and well, hello everyone, nice to see you today. I mean, you know, it's sort of like moments like that where it's like, how is sexuality meaningful? It changed my life, right? I mean, I think proclaiming yourself as like a sexuality person, like even like a professional, seems very radical to everyone else. It doesn't really feel radical to me, though, you know, I can recognize how it is. So I think that it's meaningful in a way of both from an academic and an activist perspective, but also sexuality, it's all about, I think, also using sexuality as a tool for healing for me, and that's how it's been very meaningful. So nice to be here with you all today.
Thank you so much. And I forgot to let you know, so we have 24 students who are here. They have their cameras and their microphones off for the time being, just to allow you to be sort of front and center during this part, but we'll go to Q&A towards the end. And so, Roger, when you were just talking, when you were talking about both Indigiqueer and then sort of this idea of sort of transitioning from being an individual to a professional and becoming more sort of spotlight society, which to me feels like a personal professional coming out of the closet. And Caffyn, you were talking about what you do that is part of sex work, and sex work often will have stigma and things of that sort that come with it. And so I'm curious, and if you want, you can stick with like Caffyn going first and Roger second, or you can flip-flop, however this ends up working the best. But I wonder, are there differences in what you express and what you share with people, to people that are your friends, your lovers, your family members, your neighbors, your collaborating professionals versus the general professionals you might see at some conference or some random thing? And what are some of those differences? And if you'd be willing to unpack the why you might share some things with some and not with others.
Let's see. Well, you know, I think like our sexuality is so complex that we never share all of it all at once. And, you know, in the ongoing practice of bridging differences and making connections, there's often parts of ourselves that get left behind and stay unexpressed, I think, in every relationship, in every reach for a relationship. So yeah, one time in a class, we were writing, we like to write our own sexual bill of rights, you know, with every group that we convene, and one of the students wrote the right to have secrets and to be veiled. And I thought that was a beautiful right to claim for our sexuality, to not have this sort of compulsion to disclose everything and to have nothing hidden, or to you know, in the name of honesty, destroy the mystery or pretend it doesn't exist. I think, you know, sexuality is one of those ever emergent properties of many complex systems, and to let it be that, you know, in its full complexity is, yeah, it is my practice. And so, yeah, I'm sure there's many ways and places I don't disclose all of me, and I hope that will always be.
I wonder, when you talk about that complexity, is part of that you've discovered different aspects of yourself over time, and your sense of self has maybe shifted over time, so that if you disclosed, you know, Caffyn 1.0 today, that Caffyn 2.0 next week might not be as thrilled with the labels you gave your first version of Caffyn?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's just ever emergent, I find, you know, like the more portals we go through, the more corridors we open, the different people we meet and have sex with or don't. Yeah, I mean, certainly for me, you know, at 65 years old, that my sexuality is not anything I can put an easy name to. It's still ever changing.
Thank you. Roger?
So let me just make sure I got the question right. You're curious around how my professional facing sexuality side may be in relation to my personal, if there's I think I'm reading a question that you prompted me with, around differences in what you share around your identity, right? Well, I mean, for example, again, I'd point y'all to my name that's in the little box here, right? So if you kind of hover over you'll see Dr. Roger Kuhn, right? Nobody in my life calls me doctor, you know, I mean, that's a professional thing. And I use it in a way because it gives me access. So it's a conversation around privilege from jump, right? Around, it's okay, well, I have this thing called a PhD, which means that I can either call myself Roger Kuhn PhD or Dr. Roger Kuhn, depending on the setting, right? Because folks have been culturally ingrained to think that is somehow matters. And in particular, I have a doctoral degree in human sexuality. So I'm supposed to know even more, right? There's this weight that comes with that. Now, folks don't know the story why I have my degree, what's important to me, the value that the degree holds to me is really not about the profession. That is a, what would you call it, just like a happenstance of years of work. And in certain circles, it matters, right? So I think that it matters in multiple ways. One, there aren't that many Indigenous folks, Two-Spirit Indigenous folk, who have doctoral degrees, and in particular in spaces like the sexuality professions. Usually we hang out in anthropology departments, or we hang out in English departments, and I am situated in sexuality. And so I think that there's a very big difference in my identity when I'm not in professional mode. I am very, I think when folks meet me, in person, when I'm in a professional setting, I'm relatively reserved, and I'm always on my best behavior, right? But the moment it's done, please, you know, I'm good. I'm super, super down to earth. That doesn't necessarily translate well in the world, and that's partially because of the intersections of my identity, right? So it's part of that is that professionally, it sometimes matters that certain identities are highlighted. And in an organization like ASECT, are folks here like part of like, is this like an ACE, like are they working towards certification, or is that?
So part of the ASEC certification is that you have to do a SAR at some point for 13 members. And so
Yeah.
there are many people here who are, I like to think it's a process and not just jumping through a hoop, but there are people that potentially click the box because they want to jump through the hoop to get their ASEC certification.
Sure.
There are people that have no interest in ASEC and just want to learn and expand and grow. So they're,
You know, all is welcome. And for those that are working toward the ASEP certification, you know, in it's representation matters, right? So to stand in front of like a group of sexuality professionals and also say, yes, I'm also here, I have a doctoral degree, and I'm queer, and I'm indigenous, and those are my identities that I'm known in professionally, though, again, when this is over, most people in my life call me Raj. So if that says anything, you know, most people just call me Raj because that's just how I am. And then I also happen to have these other identities, right? So.
some of what I'm hearing about from both of you is this idea of creating access for those who might not have access otherwise, and that you are potentially a bridge, you're a support, you're scaffolding for others, that in the access that you are connecting with, you're then bringing that access to others, which is really important. Thank you both for doing that. But you also talked about this idea of comfort and this idea of vulnerability. And so, you know, you're both amazing professionals, and in no way do I want to ask you to risk anything that does not feel comfortable for you, right? I mean, if you want us to call you Raj, we'll happily call you Raj, but you know, we're not going to assume that you'll be all like in your pajamas and all snuggly with us because you just met us, and you're in this sort of professional sort of situation, and so that can be a really tricky thing of do you risk not just your own access to professional environments, but do you risk the access to others or gaining that access through you and with you?
Well, I mean, part of what you're also talking about is respectability politics, right? And so we could even just have that discussion right there of like, well, what are we talking about? Like, what kind of professionalism are we speaking about? Because, I mean, there could be very different ways, and certain organizations like ASECT think certain other kinds of sexuality aren't professional, right? It's like we could have that discussion as well. It's, I think the root of it though is like what we are valued and or judged against in terms of the dominant culture and what professionalism means. Again, it's like we're somehow radical people because we're talking about pleasure. Like what? Like what's up with y'all? I mean, we allow ourselves pleasure in so many ways. Gosh, like look at the way that Americans celebrate football, right? I don't understand it. And it is this way in which there is this pathway to pleasure which is just granted, though sex is somehow right, and largely from my perspective that is because we don't talk about some of the really challenging aspects of sexuality, which is what I do in my work, to sort of talk about like, well, I mean, sexuality is that larger umbrella which differs from like an act of sex. And as a sexuality scholar or something, you know, my work is really then about like, well, how do we recognize really the violence of our own sex in the formation of what we call the U.S. and are those conversations that, you know, are willing to have, because that feels risky to me. And I always joke that, you know, don't worry, I speak white fluently. You know, I also have a white parent though, so you know, I literally do speak white fluently. Though I'm also referring to like, I know how these games are played, which is these hoops that we have to jump through sometimes as professionals. And then it's like, well, I'm going to use the value system that you taught me, this particular European education, which taught me this really great fable once about a Trojan horse that was really beautiful on the outside, and when everyone went to bed at night, these soldiers crawled out and sort of took the reins. And I feel very much that way about myself and my work. It's like you do the professional hi, here I am. Look at all my fancy, sparkly credentials at my name. Once I'm in the room, we're gonna have a conversation. I brought a sledgehammer. Oh, and I propped the door open. Right? That's how I feel about those things.
I, I'm resonating with what you say because I definitely
Yeah.
PhD program and everything, and my whole pathway. A lot of that is my putting in my time and effort to be able to then create access for others through me bringing their voices and my own voice, of course, forward into conversation, into professional environments like today, that have been historically silenced in the past. And so one of the reasons I'm so thrilled for both of you being here and why I'm giddy about what it is like to put the two of you together in a panel is I believe that both of you really care about bodies, that you really care about the somatics and how we feel in our bodies. And so there's the politics, there's shame, there's erectile dysfunction, there are all these things that we label and we discuss outside of our bodies, but eventually it's the feeling in the bodies. And so I'm curious, like Caffyn, if you don't mind me sort of asking you to go first, as you've been hearing Roger talking about this, like, how are you feeling about this conversation in your body?
I feel excitement and resonance because, it's so good to be, to find like a path of shared values and like resonant teachings and ways of being. And yeah, and resonance is actually a way like our bodies feel energy and empowerment. It's like it's a biophysical thing that happens within our bodies that gives us more power. I do want to mention just for possible future resource for folks, I have a whole teaching around being professional in a counter-normative way that is like resists the colonial culture, which is about creating outlaws. So I have this ethicsforoutlaws.com. There's a few resources there about how we might imagine, that ethics part of professionalism and what supports us in being what we deeply value and doing our work from that place ethically, but without kind of joining the white privilege club, the normative privilege club of the ordinary sort of professional association. Just being able to feel our bodies is counter-normative. I think, just living in awareness of how are we feeling, what are we feeling, and having that interoceptive capacity resourced is something like, if we're supporting clients or supporting each other, what actually helps us be brave enough to feel the cascade of sensation below the neck and not just live from up here. And it takes company. Actually touch, is what resources us to feel ourselves, to feel our bodies, and to build our interoceptive capacity. And it takes practice, and it takes a community of inquiry where people are actually asking, checking in, like, what is your mood? What are you feeling in your body? And just with your question there, I was able to notice that feeling of resonance that was vibrating me. So, yeah, thank you.
And you're asking about sort of the bigger context of the SAR. And so when you're talking about values, when you're talking about ethics, these are things that we're going to be digging into. What does it mean to be a professional or just a non-professional, a living person in society that has biomedical ethics formed in the 1870s through 1890s, early 1900s, that specifically were after what is often called the century of dishonor, which was after 400 years of genocide of the indigenous people, which was at a time when slavery and the transatlantic slave trade was coming to an end, but bigotry, of course, continues. And then when the 5,000 years of Chinese medicine lineage that had potential to inform the culture in Europe and in the United States, that there are federal acts that made it impossible for people from Asia to come to the United States, and so that there could not be a Chinese medical association until 1985 because of that. So all these values, all these ethics are things that we are going to talk about over the course of these 3 days. Not necessarily so much right now, but we can go there. I mean, this panel is all about the two of you. And so we could go off topic, and it's on topic, but off topic. So, Roger, did you have any feelings like as you were sharing, like, were you getting excited? Were you like, was the adrenaline pumping? Like, how are you feeling in your body?
Well, today's an interesting day. I'll share that. I feel very somber in my body in many ways. I was just at a memorial service right before I came here today for a friend of mine who, my age. So being at the memorial was both a beautiful, it was like literally beautiful outside, and the sun was, it happened at the AIDS Memorial Grove here in San Francisco. So if anyone's ever been there before, it's an incredibly beautiful, peaceful, tranquil place. And his mother and sister were there, and members of the San Francisco Native community were there to celebrate his life. And so, I kind of came from that right here today and was like, okay, let me breathe, let me sort of find my feet, and my friend had this expression he would always just say, just twirl, just twirl. So I twirled a little bit before before we got on, and so my body feels really present now. Maybe 15 minutes ago, or when I first started, I was a little nervous. But it's also really nice to meet with other somatic sexuality professionals and hear this language that it's like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I mean, from both the feeling perspective, but also the intellectual, oh, I know what those words mean. So my body also leaned that sensation of oh, I'd love to learn more from
you. So we were talking a second ago about ethics and values, and so are there any personal values that you have not already mentioned that you want to bring forward as you feeling to be important, both personally and potentially to be important for professionals to bring those values forward, which might not be part of the Western biomedical ethics?
Sure. Well, I think that I am. As a psychotherapist, sex therapist, even sexuality educator, I think values are so incredibly important because they really help us determine what it is that we're working toward. And oftentimes in my workshops that I lead, or in all of my clinical practice, I always have clients work with, or students work with their value system. What values, what are your goals? What values do you need to sort of get you there? And I also believe that a value is a value wherever it is. If I value courage, I value it everywhere, which is one of my values, by the way. Courage is always in my top 5 values, and I like to always name 5 values. And for me, that's primarily because I have access to all 5 digits of both hands, and I find that I can then somaticize these values and say, okay, what is it that I'm working with right now? And I can name these, and they create a fist in me that's like that symbol of okay, I got this. And it also helps me remember by somaticizing them. I remember oh yeah. So whenever I feel that sense of disconnection, I can usually tune into what value is really feeling it's and that kind of helped me. Oh, courage. I am not feeling courageous at the moment, or I am not witnessing courage at the moment, or I need courage in the moment, and I can name them that way. So then how does that show up in this work, right? That shows up by saying, I have a thought about this which doesn't feel controversial and is so controversial, like talking about the body, talking about land, talking about occupation, talking about sexuality and gender pleasure from an indigenous perspective, that to me in certain spaces takes courage, and it's a value that I am very happy to share with folks, and that shows up everywhere in my life. How can I be more courageous? But also, sorry, my little dog's, my little dog's visiting today, meaning she just woke up from her nap and decided to come up next to me. So, but I also think my values around creativity and pleasure and wellness, they kind of always hover. And at the moment, I also am working with this value in my top 5, which is normally not there, which is organization, which sounds to me just like, wow, that sounds so lame. Like organization, what is that? That's not a, and what I really mean by that is that because I'm working on some things right now that require a certain kind of organization, I put that in my top 5 value system. So.
Roger, when you were speaking, when you're talking about when you're talking about access to your 5 digits, to me it sounded like you were talking about rituals for grounding. And
yes,
so,
yeah.
plant that seed with you, but I want to go back over to Caffyn for a second. But plant the seed in grounding rituals that you might have, because I've learned from you around grounding rituals. But Caffyn, you also, to me, you do a lot of work around grounding rituals, and I've learned from you around grounding rituals and breath, things of that sort. And so, are there rituals? Are there ways that you help yourself or your clients to feel present and grounded into their sexuality?
Thank you, Fredrick. Thank you, Roger. Loved hearing about your values. Yes, definitely. I really, believe in sort of trying to welcome the idea and the ongoing practice of co-creating personal rituals. In our culture, experience of ritual is often sort of as a passive consumer of ritual, but when we can create sort of intentional space and practices to welcome non-ordinary consciousness and invite the sacred, and like trying to create this sort of time outside time where we can, maybe invite alternate ways of thinking and being, I think can be very powerful. So, simple practices like which I'm sure you all learn about breath practices, erotic breath practices, just deepening into awareness of our pelvic floor as like as a site of breath, so that we can feel that inner lover with our breath and like ground into the excitement of genital stimulation that happens with each deep breath. So, like if I'm seeing a client, I like to create a sense of ritual space within our time together. So really organize the time to have intention, be honored, and have breathing practices and sort of a sense of creating somatic alliance and centering, and then going into more discussion, and then embodied practice, and have a sense of closure and harvest and integration time. So just having sort of a basic sense of ritual structure for me, I have kind of like this iterative sense of structure, ritual structure that it might inform an hour with a client, or the same sort of iterative process informs my curriculum development if I'm guiding like a week-long intensive, and just having those intentional times and time outside time, and a sense of being able to invoke, powers greater than ourselves and non-ordinary consciousness that, the erotic for me is creating access to this, to non-ordinary states of being. And it's part of our you know, deepening into what the erotic is beyond sort of simple problem solving of like, how do you get it up and get it in and get on with your life? It's like this deepening into the full capacity of what the erotic can be, both as social thought, transformative social thought, and radical revisioning of relationship and empowerment in so many levels.
When I'm hearing you, I'm getting the sense of sort of feeling into the abyss, feeling into the void, and creating space where we might not have recognized space before. And so breathing into your pelvic floor of this idea of making love, and the idea of creating, and love being compassion and feeling fully, not the sort of hallmark version of making love. And in feeling into that, to feel into that unknown, to create the spaciousness you need to explore. Am I kind of hearing you partially correctly? Cool. Okay, go team. Roger, did you have any thoughts around grounding or how you assist clients in the
Well, yes. Well, yes, and if I could just for a moment, when I was sharing earlier about my values, and I brought up the value of organizing. I think I described the value as organizing with a term that after I said it, I was like, oh, I'm really working on not using that term anymore because I've learned it's ableist. So I just wanted to say oh, I've actually felt that in my body after I said that, and I was like, that's language that I've learned, and I've relearned, that it's like, oh, I'm not using this word anymore. So I wanted to name that I felt that in my body, and then as Caffyn was sharing around feeling the pelvic floor, it's like, I'm going to say something about it. I'm just going to name it. I'm going to welcome it into the space and say, hey, folks, it's still a learning process, certainly for me, right? So I just wanted to start there and say that. So thank you for letting me share that. And I really appreciated that idea as the pelvic, feeling the pelvic floor. And I think you phrased it something around like the breath of the inner lover. And I felt that, that little feeling that some folks call it chills, but it certainly, I noticed a spark of what felt like the erotic, which also feels like creative energy to me as well. And I really loved when you shared the erotic as access to non-normative states of being. I'm not exactly sure if that's what you said, that's what I wrote down, but it felt like, wow, I love that so much. And I think that, it's interesting the ways in which we can find grounding rituals around really embracing the erotic, which could include group pleasure experiences, in anything from even working as a sex therapist. Oftentimes, working with clients around what is that way in which you access that part of yourself that we might define as the erotic, which I may say is the whole self, but with the clients, so you start with the part, right? So they can at least sort of digest that small part, and helping them finding the tools to feel that in their body, to when you are experiencing pleasure, use your breath. It is a part, your lungs are as much part of your sexual organs as are your genitals, as is your brain. And having folks have that, there's this process of bringing the full body into, and it's also, I think that I've learned in my work that it's certainly not one of those things that works for everyone. Some folks are really great with guided visualizations. Some want to do more body scanning. And so to be able to have some somatic tools to be able to guide people that you're working with somatic interventions to sort of help them get into their body, which I think, this pelvic floor breath for the inner lover, that'll be something I I'm taking from today, being like, how can I incorporate that into the next time that I'm discussing like breathing from the pelvic floor, right? And I think that's just how you do it. Like you also learn from other somatic practitioners, and you think, oh, this is great. This is wisdom that's been passed down. And that's what's so beautiful about those of us that study the body and are certainly seeking our own attunement and our own embodiment in these ways, is recognizing this wisdom that we, how it sort of filters through us to the next, right? As we received it from our ancestors and theirs, and it's a really interesting field. We all have bodies, yet the study of the body, especially like the sexual study of the body, is still this area that there's an edge for a lot of folks around that.
When you're speaking about making love and breath, that in the tantric lineage, there's often a lot of confusion around the gendering and the genital-based gendering of tantra. And what I've been trying to communicate with people is to stop thinking about it as genitals, rather think about the idea of penetration and receiving around breath and energy. And so my energy, my breath, is potentially penetrating you. You are potentially receiving my energy or my breath. It's not about genitals at all. It's never been about genitals in the tantra lineage. It was convenient to think about those biophysical things because they were visual and tactile, but it was the energy and the breath, the idea of making love through the pelvic floor and how the energy and breath can flow from you to the universe, to you back to yourself, or you to another. But Roger, there's something you've talked about in the past, which I'm hoping you might go into a little. You've talked about literally connecting to the ground and the metaphysical connection to the ground over 7 generations, over even longer generations. And so many of us have experienced some form of vicarious or ancestral trauma, specifically around land, whether that's the reservation, whether that was transatlantic slavery, whether that was fleeing a country because of oppression and genocides that are going on in other countries. And so when so many people have lost a physical connection, or just they're stuck at their office job and clicking on their computer all day and they never go outside, when so many of us have lost connection to land, to ground, how do we recreate that?
Well, on Sunday I will fly to the homeland, which for me is this area called Porch, which is just outside of this little town called Atmore, which is in southern Alabama. And Porch is the reservation that my family lives on, and where all the tribal offices are. There's tribal housing, etc. It's a relatively small-ish piece of land that is, if you drive from Mobile, Alabama, like you're going to Pensacola, Florida or something, you will swing through. Most of the time folks never knew it was there. We now have a large casino property that lets folks know that this is where the reservation is. So I feel that there's, like in my own life, I know what it's like to touch that, like that sense of when I go to Alabama, I am troubled by the politics of the state we now call Alabama. Though when I'm at Porch, when I'm on the reservation, I really like it there. People look like me. It's, there's a certain way that we speak that I love it there. And what you're referencing once is when I was younger, I was there visiting my grandmother, and I had this vision when I was dancing, not really knowing at the time, which was what we now would call stomp dancing. What I was doing which is an ancestral dance. I just didn't know that's what it was called. That's what I was doing, and just feeling my feet connect with the earth. Something happened within me that I had this really vision of my ancestors that I believed were like there, and I could see them. And it was like, oh, of course, because this is our land. Even though they put us in a really, really small piece of it, this is still our land, and this is where we're from. Now, I didn't grow up there. I grew up in North Dakota with my predominantly with my father's family, which, as I mentioned earlier, my father's white, and so then you have this different relationship to land because it's like, oh well, my father's family, the farm I grew up in, that was on my dad's side of the family for a couple of generations, and no one ever talked about, well, where did the land come from, Grandpa? You know, like no one ever really, that was never a thing when I was a kid. And I didn't think much of it either because I wasn't raised to think that way. I was raised to think like, this is the land that we have and one day it'll be yours. And it's just very interesting to have like these, you know, parents who a big part of their lives are somewhat destined by land. Like my mother, the land that she has is not really, she can't own that land. You can't own the land on the reservation. But my father's family can own this land that was essentially, you know, via treaties and what have you, stolen from the indigenous populations of the area. So my relationship to North Dakota and the land there is, I don't really have a relationship. Though I think being here on the land, it's just sort of recognized like, oh, well, I'm also a settler here. In California, we would call that a settler. Even though I'm an indigenous person, I'm still settling here. But there is something about like knowing that when you are, I once heard Harjo, I'm blanking out on her first name right now. It's not Joy Harjo, but another Muskoke writer, Harjo, who talks about anywhere I go is a Muskoke place. Which, you know, Porch Creek, Muskoke is our tribal place. So, you know, really meaning like any of us as indigenous people, anywhere we go is, that place becomes, not that it becomes ours, but it's the way in which we see the world and how we understand land comes from our own land, right? So, you know, from Muskoke perspective, like I'm gonna have a different relationship with water and rivers than maybe I do ocean or maybe I do mountain because we don't have that where I'm from. So we have different relationship with animals and those types of things. And so for folks that are looking to reconnect with that, especially like, you know, eco-eroticism, I think is so incredibly transformative and powerful. And, you know, and then it's like, well, how do you reckon with, if you do it all, you know, when we think about like the atrocities of the indigenous peoples and what's ongoing and how we can then be on the land and use it for these purposes of the erotic, and how do I balance that out with myself, and maybe my people aren't from here, and there's so much that we can get caught up in. And so, you know, part of that is like, well, if you want to reconnect with the land, we have to learn how to respect it. And that will mean different things for different people, right? And so it's like, how can we be in relationship with what we believe is respectful of the land? And hopefully that includes some perspective, some perspective around indigeneity, hopefully. And I think those are ways in which you can transform those aspects of your life.
So we're starting to have some wonderful questions in the chat thread. People are welcome to put some more in there. We're gonna maybe have one more question, and then we'll move to the Q&A time. And so both of you have been speaking about, even though I think of you as being kin and professional kin, and being part of the circle the way that I think of sexuality and professionalism, I believe both of you have talked about the work that you do as being on those edges and maybe the fringe areas or beyond those edges. And so what for you is that boundary between what you consider professionalism, what others consider professionalism, and potentially how could people maybe refer to you or refer to other colleagues if for holistic health and to care for clients the most, it's beyond their skill set, beyond their ethical boundaries. How can they refer to you so that you could collaborate and work together? So
Um,
basically, I'm sorry, yes, go for it.
would you like me to speak? Well, I have written a number of books. So there's like I have a book on sexual, what's it called? Sexual, the science of sexual happiness, which is, I have another book called Intimacy Educator, Teaching Through Touch. I've got free video programs and videos galore on my website, and all kinds of exercises and some paid online programs. So it's like I've been a bridge builder. I did a talk at ASECT and helped encourage them to have this group, which I'm now too old to be part of, but of like body-based professionals that are members of ASECT. And so there's lots of ways to build bridges that feel, it feels sort of easy and accessible in terms of getting a hold of me, in terms of just like, how do we conceive ourselves as sexuality professionals? Like, I just encourage everyone to think about like, what is the richness of identifying with the margins and instead of the center, and to like identify yourself and be enriched by a community like in the non-normative realm and the counter-normative realm, because like fighting what's normal, what's normal is violence and colonization and sexism and racism in our sexuality. So like, do we want to be normal? Do we want to invite our clients? Like every client comes in going like, how can I be more normal? Because that's the punishment of the dominant culture, right? It's like no one feels like they fit in and everyone feels like they're not quite normal enough. So how can I be more normal? If you're the kind of expert that's gonna tell them how normal they are, well, that's okay, but it's not where I want to be. And what I want to be identified with is this counter-normative, like anti-normative way of being in practice, where it's like you can gently help them shift that question to like, how can I be more fully me? How can I find the uniqueness that's me? How can I find the resonance and the counter-normative practices and community that help me live according to what I deeply value and who I am? And that's what the kind of work that I want to bring to clients.
And this is why I love you so very much, Caffyn. Like, my heart is bursting right now with so much joy with every word that you just said. Thank you. I'm actually getting a little teary. Roger, if you have any thoughts on that, otherwise we do have a wonderful question. I want to be respectful of both of your time because I asked you for 1 hour and you're amazing people and you might have other things you need to do. So I want to respect your time. You're welcome to stay longer if you want, but I do not want to put that burden upon you unless you're choosing to. Roger, did you have any thoughts, or do you want me to ask a question that's in the chat?
You can bring the chat question in. I loved your response, by the way, Caffyn. I'll just say that.
There's a question in the chat saying thank you. And Caffyn specifically, could you please explain some concrete rituals or healing interventions you have used with trauma survivors? Other than breathwork, how do you connect with bodies in healing ways?
Yeah, my book, Science for Sexual Happiness, it has like 101 or 110 exercises or something. So you could have a look at that. But one that comes to mind that I think is really good to land is thank the no. So it's just as simple as, have your client, you create an exercise. Maybe we can demo it, Fredrick, of like you take a question. I'll ask you a question about touch, and all you say is no. No matter what you're thinking, just say no. So
I consent to this game. Go for it.
So Fredrick, could I run my fingers through your hair?
Am I supposed to say no matter what, or can I? Yes.
Yeah, say no, notice what's happening in your body and say no.
I'm saying no, but my body really wants you to run your fingers.
Well, thank you for taking care of yourself. And could I shake your hand?
No, thank you. I would not like you to shake my hand right now.
Thank you for taking care of yourself. And Fredrick, could I jump on your back and ride you around the room as if you were a pony?
No, Caffyn, because even though that'd be really fun and giggly, I don't trust my back right now to support you, and I wouldn't want to possibly drop you and hurt you.
Thank you for taking care of yourself. So you do that for a while, and you can get funny, and it's fun because the person always has to say no. That's the rules of the game. And then you unpack it, like spend time going like, oh, what'd you notice in your body? Yeah, there were times when you really wanted that touch. How did you notice? How did you know? Like, how did it feel to have like your nose greeted with a gratitude? Like, that's so different, right? Like normally we say no to someone and they get all huffy and they feel sad and they're like, oh, sorry, I even asked. And then you go on, you get in the business of taking care of their feelings and you feel bad for saying no. But here, oh, you're in an environment where your no gets thanked. And so you have that like contradictory experience where they get to say no and have that welcomed and be noticing what's going on in their body. And then also noticing that, oh, sometimes maybe they would like touch. So it's just a simple way of just, you have fun and play with that, no, that creating this counter-normative environment where your no is actually going to be celebrated. Yeah, my book, I'll write the name here. It's called Science for Sexual Happiness. And I got tons of free material on my website, so overwhelming amount. Whoops. I'm also not being a very good speller, but I put that in the chat.
Thank you so very much. There are a number of people. There are many people on Zoom, but there also are a number of people who are in physical space with me here, the students as well. And a lot of people are bubbly and excited and saying wonderful affirmations of how incredible you are. So just to let you know. And we are at the top of the hour, so I do want to be respectful of your time. I'm about to ask a question, but it puts you in a difficult sort of power dynamic differential issue of, do you have another second or two? Do you need to go right now? You have zero pressure to stay for even one more second.
I'm happy to stay for another like 5 minutes or something.
Okay. Roger? Okay. Roger, did you have any thoughts around what Caffyn was just sharing or the question that was asked?
Yeah, I appreciated what you shared, right? And I think that's unfortunately, a training like that is so rare in therapy. It's just, I was thinking, which I thought you were very skilled at, that facilitation. I was thinking that, it's rare to, I went to a somatic psychotherapy program for my master's, and still there, I'd somewhat left the program thinking like, I'm not sure that I have all of knowing that I'm not going to get all of the knowledge, right? But I didn't even know if I had enough knowledge to really begin the inquiry of having someone touch base with their body, and really having those feelings and experiences in the body be one of those gateways to their healing, right? So my thought was really around even something like sex therapy programs, and how can we make sure to incorporate more of that, like, so it just becomes normalized, like in the work as an educator, as a therapist, as a counselor, whatever it might be, that it becomes normal to really check in with, what are you noticing about this experience? That's where the work is, right? The work isn't necessarily in like, what are you thinking about this particular thing you're watching or reading or whatever. It's oftentimes, how do you feel about that? but then the feeling part isn't what's respected in academics. They go with this, and then they go home and go with that. It's like, come on, y'all, like, you know, how can we welcome both in? And having years and years and hundreds of years in academia still hasn't fully caught on to the beauty of the body-mind connection, right? And I think that there's so many ways to do that through movement, through breath work, through touch, through writing, creativity. I mean, there are endless ways that we can use our body and movement as a way to heal from trauma, sexual trauma. Yeah, most definitely.
And I wish we could talk for hours and hours, and I welcome doing such at any time in the future that either of you ever want.
Thank you.
I'm curious, do you either have any closing thoughts, or particularly maybe suggested incremental steps that people could take to learn and to embody the professionalism and the kindness and the compassion that you have yourself and that you bring to your clients, maybe?
Well, I'll just say thank you for the honor of being here, and I was just thrilled to be and honored to be here with Roger, and I wish I could meet you all, and I welcome you to contact me through my website or connect somehow. So just yeah, and I got, as I said, tons of things on my website that are free. So yeah, I can direct you to practitioners that are carrying on the work, though I don't practice myself anymore. So thank you.
I would just say, you know, keep learning, keep curious, keep if you have a thought or an idea, lean on that value of courage and explore it. Do you have a book? Write a book. There is a need for, I think, the continuation of this conversation that we were invited to be a part of today in a larger field as well. And I think it's just be curious, and it's really great to have folks who see you, right? So, you know, I think Fredrick and your team for inviting us today, for acknowledging the work that we are doing. So I appreciate that.
My pleasure. As I said in the beginning, I'm a huge fanboy of both of you. And really, truly, anytime you want to just chat, or you want to collaborate, or you want to have a discussion, whether it's publicly or privately, I'm 100% in.
Okay. Well, if we're gonna say goodbye, can we see the folks? Do folks mind turning on your camera for a moment just to say hi? I always love to see, like, hey, there's a person there. Hi there. Nice to see you all. Thank you for inviting us, having us be a part of this week. Thank you. Good to see you. Happy summer solstice. Happy Pride for those of you that are celebrating. At least here in this area, we have Pride this weekend. So wonderful. Well, thank you all.
Our group